Oh, today's topic is about TPU tubes. I'm not going to get into weighing them and tell you how much smaller they are than conventional butyl or latex tubes. I'm going to talk more about some of the engineering aspects of them and why you may consider them for either a carry item in case you get a flat tubeless and or run them full time on your road. And I'm probably going to tell you some things that most of the YouTubers won't, particularly about their material properties. Most serious cyclists, the traditional butyl tube is dead, particularly considering that for road and for gravel, TPU replacement tubes are only about twice as much if you shop on AliExpress as these butyl tubes. They're heavier and more bulky. So when you're road cycling, it's to me 50-50 on whether you go tubeless, which is now fantastic, or I like less of a hassle because I have so many bikes tubeless that you run the TPU tubes. If you go to gravel, you go to mountain, or you go to fatter plus, unless you're still in the late 90s, you go tubeless, period. So what these are carry options for in case you get a flat or you annihilate your tire. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about some considerations about this. TPU tubes are relatively inexpensive on AliExpress now. I would not recommend using the 24-gram tubes. Just forget about those. If you've got the older style ones, you're not going to have a removable valve core for road. So what I generally recommend is you go for the more modern ones if you want to use a click valve. Video coming up on that, little foreshadowing. For gravel, same thing. Minimal weight difference between these two, but you get the option of a removable valve core. It's also nice to do that in the event that you bend your Presta core in an accident when you're pumping it or something, then at least you have the option to replace it. The same when you go to the older Tubolito ones for mountain biking. Hopefully newer ones. Always look for a replaceable valve core because obviously you know when you're out in the bush, you're a little tired. Sometimes you might slip on a Presta valve core, particularly if you're not used to, let's call it field emergency inflations. The risk goes up. I took detailed notes on pressure loss for the TPU tubes front and rear on this bike while I was testing it. And it generally averaged between 2 and 4 psi per 24-hour period. So basically, if you forgot to pump your tires and went for a ride, particularly at my 73 rear, 70 front, it's probably not going to be the end of the world. Much better than latex tubes and probably comparable to a lightweight butyl tube. Installation appears to be a little easier when you're finishing off with a TPU tube as opposed to a butyl tube. I'm being a little lazy here, but if you want to avoid using a tire lever, that's always recommended. But in this case, I'm going to quickly pop the bead. But what I've noticed is because it holds its shape better than a butyl tube, there's less likelihood of you actually pinching it. Let's look at how these tubes perform unconfined. So a butyl tube is going to pump up, and this is called elastic, where it's linear. Then at a certain pressure, if it's unconfined, it's going to take less pressure to stretch it more, then it eventually ruptures. In the case of a TPU tube, it's much stiffer. So you have an elastic range, and then it'll yield. It's going to go plastic, and then it's going to rupture. The main learning here, or the thing I want to stress to you the most, is that if you're going to use TPU tubes, always stay within the manufacturer's recommended size. Otherwise, you risk going plastic, like I've shown here on this tube. And I can assure you, this is way less resistant to punctures and or pinch flats. Another way of explaining this is consider the butyl tube like an elastic, whereas, God, I love doing this, the ride nows are like a balloon. Take great care when you're pumping up your tube. So this is when you'd fit it into the inner tube, maybe even a less pressure than this, because it's very difficult to predict when a section of your tube is going to go plastic. Let's see here. Right there. There we go. Your inner tube is done. Oh, look, we're getting another bulge here. Let's poke a hole in the non-yielded section of the tubulito. Here is the elastic section of the tube that I poked and successfully patched with a patch kit. This is the plastic. There's no return once you take something plastic. Oh, maybe there is, but whatever.
So, of course, the one little section I had that was going to make me famous, I forgot to turn my mic on. But what I'm doing here is I started off at 3 psi, pumped it up to about 10, and then went for 12. And you can see the results.
A real world simulation. You can see I keep what causes me flats, and I'm going to just grab that thing and let's try to give this a poke. That's harder than it seems. Jeez. Ow. Ah, full credit. For this video, I've kept the pieces of metal that have caused me flats. And here's my Park Speed patches, and I'm just going to give this a poke. There we go. And we now have a flat. Let's give it another one just for craps and giggles.
My general impression is that the TPU tubes are at least as puncture resistant and maybe a little more than your standard butyl tubes.
Current patching options are these cheap stickers that they give you, typically in the boxes of any of these tubes. You can buy the cheap stickers if you want as an aftermarket. Neither are recommended. My favorite, which I'll get into, is the Park Tool Speed Patches GP2. Or you can go like a traditional tube patch kit that we've used on butyl tubes for years.
These sticker patches are shiza. I've deleted about 3 minutes of me proving that. So just trust me. They're your last option. Young men, kind of like when the bar lights go on at 3 a.m. and you're alone.
One of my favorite things is coming back from a ride, then going out to the stand in the morning to look at your bike and oop, 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 something's wrong. Here's the hole from that flat right here. Now what most people will do is either patch this and throw it right back into the tire, but clearly something has poked a hole in this. So the first step you should do is actually check the tire. So what I'm going to do see I've marked that, is I'll grab the valve stem and notice the tire label and the valve stem hole. So there we are when we line it up. If you don't know which way it is, you can flip-flop it. But now I'm going to check right about here. There's something very subtle. But sure enough, if I flip the tire over, I don't know if you can see that behind the valve stem, but there's a metal shard, likely from a retread, they call them, I guess, from a truck tire there. If you're assessing a tire, check the outside first. And then, if you don't see anything, slowly move your hand around the inside. I personally have gotten myself some nasty cuts removing my hand very rapidly along the inside of a tire and end up cutting myself on a shard of glass. And let me tell you, when you're trying to put a patch on, when it's covered in blood, it doesn't stick that well. After wiping this thing down with some isopropyl alcohol, I'm just going to try a Park Super Patch. See if that's going to work on this. If I could actually get this thing unpeeled. There we go. Hopefully this works. It's certainly a lot better than those cheap stickers. If you remember that staple that I was poking the tubes with, it got lodged in that back tire, and I patched it with a Park Speed Patch. That speed patch has been ridden for 260 kilometers and has been in for about 3 weeks. There is no appreciable difference in tire pressure drop, and I've had no issues for that rear tire when I compare it to the intact tube in the front tire. So the Ride Now kit includes 6 small, 6 large patches, 4 alcohol wipes, and your rubber cement. And of course, the directions. So basically you clean it, put the glue on, put the patch on right away, you hold it for a minute, and then you wait half an hour until you can use the tube. So I think that pretty much eliminates it for a ride carry solution unless you have all the time in the world. Young men, never give up. So that is your stock glue-on patch. Look at this. That's another glue-on patch on my previous failure to impress you. Look how it stretches. That's pretty impressive for these patches. Now hopefully this works this time. Well, Tubolito, you're better than the rest. What we have here is a comparison between a Park patch and a glue patch. These have been on here and inflatable multiple times before I pop this tube. Basically for performance, there's no difference. So you can spend half an hour waiting for this one, or you can just stick this one on. I pick Park.
The next section shows a little experiment I did to replace a broken Presta valve on a non-replaceable tube. And while I was doing it, I just jammed some Stan's tubeless in, because I know a lot of YouTubers are talking about whether or not you would run Stan's inside one of the tubes with replaceable valve cores. Of course, I really don't recommend this.
People ask if these are Stan sealant compatible. It doesn't matter because the valve cores are not removable. They'll turn though with a tool on these Ride Nows. But I'm going to solve that here. I can assure you that any valve core like this one is removable. There we go, removable valve core. If you don't know this already, this is the best sealant injector ever made. Just the Stan's bottle from their individual portions. And I'm going to inject this sealant in. This out with this bit so that I can get the core in. Just the tiniest bit of epoxy. Once I get the valve in, and hopefully we're off to the races here. And as I've told you before, young men, always make sure when you're sticking things into tight holes, you have something around to clean up the mess when you're using lubrication. There we go. So I'm going to let this set for a while, then my science experiment shall continue.
Many of the tubes featured within this video have the replaced core in them, and they worked just fine. Can't say the same for the stands tubeless.
You can see a slight discoloration on the outer radius of the tube. That's where stands tubeless has dried up. I had originally put 40 milliliters in, and that was about, let's say, 2 weeks for it from pooling on the bottom. I think my kids were moving it around and it ended up drying up. Walk back what I said to you about the sealant. It's more sinister. It appears to not pool and be equally distributed along the inside of the TPU tube that I installed the sealant in. You can clearly see where the TPU tubes are joined together. Most of the time it's near the valve stem. And what this shows is what I'll call the sphincter effect. So don't be too concerned if you're inflating your tire and there's one spot that doesn't inflate. It will suddenly pop. As an example, I believe this tubolito will pop at roughly around 30 psi, and this area will fill out to expand to the volume of the tire. Now, I'm not going to test this out, but anecdotally, bike mechanics on fat bike tires have reported to me that these Revolup tires don't really pop out at the low pressures that are required for fat biking. So they do not recommend using these as full-time running tubes, only as an emergency backup. I'm going to demonstrate the sphincter effect here. I'm at 6 psi and I'm going to take it to 30. There's 30. You can see a bump right there. Now let's go to 50. There's still not a bump, but a bit of a depression right there where the tubes join together. Now let's go to 70. Now at 70, it's almost completely gone. I'm going to give it one more pump to 80. I can still feel a little bit at 80, but it's pretty much out of there. And I'm not sure if you'd actually notice that depression while you're riding. But riders that are very lightweight, that are using low pressures, be careful about this. Bringing this home, if you want to use TPU for road, I'd highly recommend it. If you're not a super competitive cyclist, there's less faffing around. And you can even patch these if you want, but I don't recommend using those cheap stickers. Use either the Park GP2 or the patch kits you get, oh there it is, from AliExpress. Remember about the sphincter effect that I talked about. Inflate these things very carefully before you put them in to the tire, not to overinflate them, and I'm not going to pop any more for you. I always recommend, if you're new into the market, is get the ones with the replaceable valve core on them with the metal shaft. That way, you can bring a valve tool with you and a couple of spare Presta heads, just in the event that you end up bending your head when trying to repair it in the field. What the heck? I'll do anything for views. With this, like, subscribe. If you got a question or comment, put it down below. We'll see you soon.